Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Govea. I am a criminal defense attorney at the R&R Law Group, located in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. And today, we're talking about the restoration of Donald Trump, returned to the Twitterverse. And so that's going to be the main part of, well, the first part of the show. We've got a lot of other business to attend to, but the restoration has happened. He has returned. He hasn't posted anything quite yet, but we are still waiting for that with bated breath. And of course, we will see what that looks like. But in our first segment, we've got to unpack everything that took place there. We've got some reaction. We've got crying Adam Kinzinger was very upset about this. He was even invoking Russian bots because why not? We're going to check in with him, and Pencil Neck Schiff also was very upset about this. They're very, very annoyed that Trump is back on Twitter. They do not want that to happen. America is going to be doomed. And you may have seen this over the weekend, but there was some sort of question about whether Trump was actually banned for a legitimate reason. You know, people sort of glossed over that in the chaos of January 6th, and don't even necessarily mean the day, but in the aftermath, right? A lot of people just sort of started banning Trump and nobody asked any questions. Well, we went back and looked at the policy, and we're going to remind ourselves about Trump's very peaceful tweets when he was saying to everybody, stay calm, stay peaceful, we're the party of law and order. They kind of left that stuff out of the January 6th committee hearings. But Trump had a bit to say about this. He was asked, are you returning to Twitter? Are you going to come back here and, cause a bunch of ruckus for the Democrats? And he said, well, he kind of hedged on it. So we'll listen to what he said there. Then I noticed something interesting over the weekend, and you probably saw this also, but the media, it feels like they get their talking points, or like there's a memo that goes out and then everybody just shows up, or they book the same guest. It's a weird sort of phenomenon that happens. It's like when there are the two movies that come out at the same time, like Armageddon and Deep Impact. You're like, what happened? Did these two people just have asteroid movies in their brains and it just all happened naturally? I don't think so. I think there's a plan. They're sort of ripping each other off, whatever the saga is. There were 3 attorneys general yesterday who were out hitting the airwaves. And you see, we've got them queued up here. We've got Bill Barr, who said, well, Trump's probably getting indicted, and sort of like, well, maybe he should be, kind of a thing. We're going to check in with Neal, who is another former attorney general, who says, yeah, it's all but done. I mean, it's done deal. Trump's going to be indicted any minute now. And then we've got Alberto Gonzalez, who was another former attorney general, who says, yeah, it's basically the end of the road. And so they all went out on the media and made those statements. And of course, we'll see what the Republicans have to say about this, because Jim Jordan says this is all a bunch of ridiculous nonsense. It seems very convenient that they roll out this special counsel. It seems like it's a scripted attack on Trump. Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying that the Republicans are not even going to allow this to go forward. They're just going to defund everything. So we've got some conversation about that and what the Republicans are going to do if Donald Trump does, in fact, get indicted. And then we're going to turn over to some a little bit heavier legal lifting. We've got Biden, who's taking his student loans case up to the Supreme Court. And we covered this last week. Biden had lost in several different circuit courts or federal district courts around the country. Lost, they said, a totally unconstitutional. What kind of a psycho would even think this would pass muster? Of course, Joe Biden did that. And now, since he's lost several times, he's saying, all right, to heck with you guys. We're just going to go right up to the Supreme Court and see what they have to say about it. So we're going to go into that. There was a brief that was filed last week that is, now hitting the docket. And so we'll see what the Supreme Court has to say about it. But we're going to go through it in full. We're also going to check in with the White House and see if they have any opinions on, inflation and whether the student loan program is ultimately going to cause further economic catastrophe for this country. We don't know. But the Biden administration is now sending letters out to people saying that student loans are ultimately being dismissed. In other words, your application has been granted, but you still owe everything until we can get it finally dismissed. So they're like sort of approving it without giving you the benefit. It's like the car is yours. You just can't drive it anywhere. And they are really trying, I think, to bolster up some public opinion to encourage the courts to find in their favor. So we'll talk about all of that. And then we've got a final little bit of an update. We've got Jen Psaki's on the program. Well, not her. We don't have any clips from her, I don't think. Did I clip anything for her? No, I don't think so. There wasn't anything good from her. But she is going to be appearing at a deposition, which is going to be just a ton of fun. Can't wait for this one. Now, remember that Missouri and the other states are suing the Biden administration, saying, you colluded with the big tech companies. And people like Jen Psaki have been trying very hard to get out of the deposition. That's not going to happen. She filed a notice. She filed a motion. She said, this is a major burden for me. You know, I've got like a lot of work to do at MSNBC talking about Donald Trump. And if I have to take a break from that and come back over here and talk to you people, you know, I might miss a segment with whoever else is over there. So she said, please don't depose me. The judge said, sorry, you are going to be deposed. That's not good enough. And we'll go through all of that, which is, of course, a lot of fun. So, my friends, we have a lot of business to attend to. As you can see, it's a Monday morning. It's a holiday week. And so I would invite you, if you'd like to be a part of the show, of course, jump on in there in the chat. I see the chat is moving along. Shout out to Just Cause, Just My Opinions over there. We see Haley P, Mary Fam over on the YouTube chat, along with Just Cause, Maddie Adams. Shout out to Mark Owens, Curtis Bartle, members, all on the program. Geomancy Games is in the house. He's over on YouTube. Of course, you can subscribe to him on YouTube as well. Right next door, right over there. Couple clicks that way. You'll find him. And that's Geomancy Games. And shout out to our YouTube friends. Doug Onby, Big John, Haley P's in the house. Are all here. Now, over on Rumble, shout out to our Rumble friends as well, because we're growing a nice little community over there as well. We've got Misbehaving Irishman, Peter Tag, and T-Tones. He says the chat's messed up over here. Well, that's, guess, the end of that. Thanks for the notice there, T-Tones. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on over there. And over to our friends on Locals, which is where you can see where the real party is with Uncle Shane, Paul Mino, and John McGarvey. And they you want to see what they did for me? This is what they did over here. This was what I opened the chat to today. That's what it was over there on Locals. Yeah. So, you know, I think it's a lot of fun over there. That's the whole point. You know, that's what's going on over there at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And we're going to have our after party as usual, because that is a lot of fun. All right, my friends. And so let's get right into the program on the day. Let's cue this puppy back up, so that we can just get right to business and get this all scrolled up. I know I started laughing my little caboose off when I opened up the local show. So that's pretty good. All right, and so let's get right to it. Donald Trump returns to Twitter. And my friends, this has been quite the saga. In fact, there was a very interesting piece that summarized exactly what happened that was released sort of as a montage over the weekend. Here is how Donald Trump came back on. Shout out to Bitcoin meme. Shout out to Cat Turd. Shout out to everybody who put that meme together. I saw that first from Naive Meme over on Twitter from Bitcoin meme. And that's basically how the entire Twitterverse felt when the news broke. Everybody was pretty shocked. Here is the actual poll. And it was kind of a wild thing, because this is what Elon did. He actually did it via poll. You know, it was actually, he said, hey, I'm going to just publish this and see what you guys have to say about it. In fact, here the poll is, it was published officially on November 18th. It got over 15 million votes. Holy moly, right? That is a lot of them. And that is 51.8% in favor of reinstating former President Donald Trump, 48% to 0. And he said, well, as the people go, the voice of the people is the voice of God. He says 134 million people have seen this poll. And a lot of people had a ton of reaction to this thing. Okay. And we're going to go through quite a bit of that, because we've got a lot from the Democrats, very upset. We've got Kinzinger, who's basically a Democrat, Schiff, Pencilneck, who's very upset about this, and this other guy who even knows who he is, but he's saying that this is Russia, right? All of those results were Russian hacked bots. So it's like insane. But we're going to get into all of that. But I wanted to make sure we could sort of refresh our recollection. Why was Donald Trump banned in the first place? Why did he get booted? I mean, January 6th was sort of like a little bomb went off, right? It was a lot of chaos. Nobody really knew what the heck was going on. A lot of us were skeptical. Other people were saying it was all Trump's fault. We had a big discussion about it, but the news was chaotic. We really couldn't, tell what was north or south or what was right or wrong. And all the media companies just decided kind of unilaterally, you probably remember this, there was like this domino effect where every single company, just one after the other, just started to just get rid of Trump. He was banned from all sorts of different platforms, sort of one right after the other. He got, I think, Facebook and Twitter and every single one of them, including payment processors, PayPal, all of it. But why? What was the whole point of that? What happened? Well, here's what Twitter said. Back on January 8th, Friday, 2021, just 2 days after January 6th, they said, regarding the permanent suspension of Trump. They said, after a close review of recent tweets from @RealDonaldTrump account, the president at the time, and the context around them, specifically how they are being perceived and interpreted on and off Twitter. This is official, right, from their blog. We have permanently suspended the account due to the risk of further incitement of violence. And you say, okay, great. All right, that was literally January 8th after January 6th. Okay, so what could he possibly be talking about? Is he posting on Twitter that I was following Trump at the time? Okay, following all of this. We were live streaming with you here. Asking, what was he saying that was instigating violence? And so the Twitter dorks back then, they said, hey, in the context of the horrific event this week, we made it clear on Wednesday that additional violations of the Twitter rules would potentially result in this very course of action. So in other words, they gave him a warning. Our public interest framework exists to enable the public to hear from elected officials and world leaders directly. Got it. It's built on a principle that people have a right to hold power to account in the open. Yeah, exactly. We want to hear from Trump. Okay. We, as the people, we want to hear from him. It's not just about Trump's ability to communicate his message to us. It's we want to hear from him. But they know better than us. However, we made it clear going back years that these accounts are not above our rules entirely and cannot use Twitter to incite violence. Okay, well, I'm waiting for it. Where's the violence? We will continue to be transparent around our policies and their enforcement. The below is a comprehensive analysis of our policy enforcement approach in this case. Now, let's see how comprehensive this is. Okay, it's not that comprehensive. Well, let's go through it. On January 8th, President Trump tweeted, January 8th, not even January 6th. He said, quote, the 75 million great American patriots will have a giant voice into the future. They will not be disrespected or treated unfairly in any way, shape, or form. Shortly thereafter, he said, to all those who have asked, I will not be going to the inauguration on January 20th. Okay, there you go. Those are the two messages. Due to the ongoing tensions in the United States, and an uptick in global conversations regarding the people who violently stormed the Capitol on J6, these two tweets must be read in the context of broader events in the country. So it's not even he made a direct claim about anything. It's in the broader context. Okay. He says, including where the statements can be mobilized by different audiences, including to incite violence. Oh, yeah. After assessing the language, it goes against our glorification of violence policy, and therefore he is permanently suspended. We've assessed two tweets saying that it might replicate other acts of violence. The statement that he's not going to be attending the inauguration seems to sow discord in the orderly transition, right? The second tweet, so it's just, this is some, bizarre person who's just trying to, you can see, rewrite what he said. Donald Trump wrote what he said, and this is some person rewriting what he said. The second tweet may also serve as encouragement. Oh, it may also. It may not. It could become whatever this writer wants it to be. The use of the words, quote, American patriots to describe some of his supporters is being interpreted as support for those who committed violent acts. Okay, so the word American patriots now, just some bozo in Twitter just decided to define what that means. The mention of his supporters having a giant voice into the future and they're not going to be disrespected is a plan to shield those who believe, the way he does about the outcomes. As such, our determination says that this is likely to inspire others to replicate violent acts, and there are other indicators, and this is encouragement to do so. Therefore, he is gone. He's going to be booted off Twitter, right? That was the whole basis for it. So in other words, these weren't even anything that sort of led up to January 6th. It wasn't January 6th tweets in and of themselves. These were after the fact on January 8th tweets, and it was about not going to the inauguration. That's the one tweet. And the other one is we're not going to be disrespected or treated unfairly. That's it. Those are the two reasons. Those are the glorification of violence. All right. So that's why they booted Donald Trump out of there. And well, now he's back. And so we can see that before they booted him, there were several very peaceful tweets that they just left out, which you can see here. He posted both of these things, which, as far as I can recall, never made it into the January 6th fake garbage, illegally constituted January 6th committee. He said here, I am asking, right? This was posted on January 6th, the day of. They didn't factor this into their context. I'm asking everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful. No violence. Remember, we are the party of law and order. Respect the law and our great men and women in blue. Thank you. Please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on the side of our country. Stay peaceful. Donald Trump posted January 6th. But that didn't make it into the January 6th official committee for some reason. Now, of course, we have to talk about the reaction from Kinzinger, from the Russian bots allegations that are making their way on CNN and elsewhere. We're also going to check in with Adam Schiff. But first, we have to say a shout out and a special thank you to our sponsors over at 4Patriots. And of course, my friends, as you know, a food shortage could be coming in the United States. Experts have been talking about this as recently as July. We've got drought, inflation, new policies, different things are pushing our food supply to a breaking point. Now, that's why survival food is more important now than ever. And you can create your own stockpile of best-selling 4Patriots survival food kits today. It's not ordinary food. This is good for 25 years, super survival food. It's hand-packed by family-owned facilities in the United States. It gives jobs to over 200 Americans. Kits are compact, they're sturdy, they're water-resistant, they stack easily. Different delicious breakfast, lunches, and dinners. And you can make these things very easily. All you have to do, boil, simmer, and serve. 20 minutes, you're good to go. And right now, you can go to 4patriots.com, use promo code Robert to get 10% off of your first order, including, take a look at this 3-month survival food kit. It's outstanding. You'll get everything in here for an entire year guaranteed, plus free shipping on any orders over $97. They're called 4Patriots because a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support our veterans and their families. And you can go to 4patriots.com, use promo code Robert, start building your stockpile today. And look at this, it looks outstanding. And so thank you to 4Patriots and for supporting 4Patriots. Thank you to you for supporting them. But all right, now let's take a look at what the Democrats are saying in response to all of this, because of course, Donald Trump is officially back on Twitter. His account is unsuspended, but it has not been tweeted upon. We haven't seen Donald Trump emerge. We're going to ask ourselves if he is going to. We have a little bit of a statement from him here. But before we get to Trump, let's see what some of the Democrats are so upset about, because they are upset. Adam Kinzinger, very upset that Donald Trump is now back on Truth Social, and he doesn't think it's legitimate. In fact, he thinks that this might be the result of Russian bots.
Was taken off Twitter in the first place for inciting the violent insurrection against the Capitol. You're a member of the committee investigating the insurrection. What do you make of Elon Musk reinstating Donald Trump?
Well, look, I mean, I get that people are on all sides of this debate. The fact that he did it with a poll of which, you know, however many percent of those could have been bots that aren't real people voting in that. Secondarily,
the Twitter bots?
I don't know if, you know, that decision should be made by some poll. I mean, what happened, if remember specifically when this was all done, so not only was he lighting and accelerating the fire on January 6th, also before January 6th with his conspiracies, at the end of the day, he said, this is what you get when a victory is so unceremoniously basically taken away from the American people. So not only when it was done did he have any remorse, he said, well, of course you guys had an insurrection because that's what you get when you steal an election. I mean, I remember seeing that specific tweet and just being outraged at how after all this is done, can you still do that? And so now this idea that he's going to come on and be reformed, everybody knows he won't. And by the way, I'll say as a quick aside, the person probably the most upset today is Devin Nunes, because this is going to tank Truth Social if he does in fact leave.
All the bots, all of the very indefinable things that vote for things and suddenly, changes the outcomes in ways that you don't like. He's very upset about that happening on Twitter. And of course, nobody wants that happening anywhere. But Adam Kinzinger is, not even, he kind of seems like a denier, like a poll denier kind of a thing. He's sort of, is he questioning Elon? Is he questioning the outcome of the results? It's strange to me. Okay, but that's Adam Kinzinger, very upset about Trump, sort of, I guess, being back on there. He can't believe it. He read one of Trump's tweets one time, and he has nightmare and, ongoing PTSD as a result of it. So hopefully he is okay. But it's not just him who thinks that maybe that poll is illegitimate. On Face the Nation, I don't even know who this guy is. This person thinks that Elon's poll for Donald Trump was colluded by Russians.
So I think these polls are mostly a gimmick, and I would argue the people haven't spoken. The GRU has spoken.
Oh, there it is.
These Twitter
Russian
has become,
intelligence, you mean?
100%. Twitter has
Definitely.
become a playground for bad actors and fake bots. This poll is meaningless. This decision is meaningless.
Yeah.
But you had predicted earlier that Twitter could collapse.
Yeah, it could collapse. And my gosh, those Russian bots hacking the polls on Twitter, it could be the end of America as we know it. I mean, the Russians have infiltrated the Trump campaign. The Russians have infiltrated the election systems. The Russians have infiltrated now the Twitter polls. Oh gosh, we're all going to be doomed. We're all going to die because of the Russian bots. Everywhere we go. Now it's this guy on Face the Nation. Now, it's not just those two who are upset about this. We have more reaction from the January 6th Select Committee members. Adam Schiff is quite perplexed as to why Donald Trump is back on Twitter, saying that the January 6th committee has already done its due diligence. They've proven this man is an insurrectionist. And now Donald Trump is going to be insurrecting social media.
So I want to begin with the news overnight that Donald Trump has been reinstated by Elon Musk on Twitter. Watching the January 6th committee hearings, Trump's tweets were a big part of the story to be told. What do you think of him being back on Twitter?
Except those tweets that we just looked at that weren't the go home peacefully, no violence, only peace. We are the party of law and order. Most of that stuff was sort of left out. And what's very interesting is that there was no historical record of it because they canceled his entire account.
Twitter.
I think it's a terrible mistake, and you're absolutely right. As we showed in the January 6 hearings, the president used that platform to incite that attack on the Capitol. His comments about the vice president, his own vice president, put Mike Pence's life in danger. He showed no remorse about that. He continues to lie about his actions on that day. He talks about pardoning the people who attacked police officers and attacked the Capitol that day. And it
which they should be pardoned, by the way. There were many people who were entrapped into being in there and charged with crimes in the first place. We've covered a lot of it here. And you people on the January 6th Select Committee still haven't communicated to us how many of those people were federal informants. We know that there were at least, I don't know, a dozen split between the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. That's basically been confirmed in court documents now. I sound like Alex Jones. But, it has been confirmed. Federal informants were embedded all over the place. Nobody wants to talk about it. But they were there. And he is saying that, well, we talked about this also, where they were waving people in, literally opening doors and waving people into the Capitol. Why should they not be pardoned? They've been the subject of political prosecutions from the Democrats for almost 2 years now. That's the entire reason we have the pardon power, is to have an escape valve for partisan prosecutorial hacks like these people.
Predicts what Elon Musk said, that he was going to establish a council to evaluate this, and further contradicts Musk and his claimed concern about bots on his own platform. To subject the decision to a poll on the platform that could be easily abused that way. It just underscores the erratic leadership of Twitter now under Musk, but also the security concerns with security people fleeing Twitter and what that means for the protection of Americans' private data.
Do you see where that's going? One more time. Listen to this.
But also the security concerns with security people fleeing Twitter. And what that means for the protection of Americans' private data.
Yeah, they got to step in and protect you harder now because Elon Musk is now in charge. They're not too concerned about TikTok or their lovable friends, Facebook, who will print Zuckerbucks out of his derriere right for them, right into their mouths. He is just so upset that Elon now is in charge. Security might be problematic. And so you might need the federal government to, step on in and help out a little bit so that Elon doesn't do anything that might jeopardize national America's security interest or even private citizens' interest, So Elon, I can almost guarantee that they're going to come under the scrutiny of the FTC. You're going to see all sorts of, inquiries taking place. Even Joe Biden said he's worth being looked into, because that's what happens when the left loses one of their pillars. They had control over the entire conversation. Everybody went into this big feeding trough where they could just fill it with their sludge, and all of us had to guzzle it down. Well, guess what? Elon's in charge of it now, and they don't like that. So they're taking the whole thing away if they can. This is just a precursor of what's to come. I can't imagine what these people are plotting against Elon when the time is right. Now, Trump is responding to some of this. Of course, people are waiting for the tweet. Where is it? Where's the tweet? Ugh. But it's not happening. We'll see. Now, Trump gets asked about the return to Twitter. Mr. President, you're back unsuspended. Are you going to be tweeting? You've got like 83 million followers over there. People want to hear from you. What do you have to say about it?
My question to you is, what do you think about Elon Musk buying Twitter? And if you are reinstated, will we see you back on Twitter again?
Well, I like that he bought it. I've always liked him. I got along with him very well during my days as president, and I got to know him pretty well. But I do like him. I've always really, he's a character, and I tend to like characters, but he's smart. He did put up a poll, and I hear it's very overwhelming, very strong. But I have something called Trump. If you look, it's Trump-owned, but it's really fantastic. Truth Social, and Truth Social is through the roof. It's doing phenomenally well. The press hates to talk about it, but it's doing phenomenally well. I think engagement is much better than it is with Twitter. And it's taking care of voices that really want to be taken care of, and really smart voices, brilliant voices, voices that in many cases are both sides. But I can tell you there's a lot of voice for Israel, a lot of power for Israel in Truth Social. So Truth Social.
Now, I think he's speaking at an event for Israel or something. That's why that might sound out of context.
Has been very, very powerful, very, very strong. And I'll be staying there. But I hear we're getting a big vote to also go back on Twitter. I don't see it because I don't see any reason for it.
There's a reason.
Problems at Twitter. You see what's going on. It may make it. It may not make it. But the problems are incredible. The engagement's
not really
negative. And you have a lot of bots and you have a lot of fake accounts, which I think they should get on. But Truth Social has taken the place for a lot of people. And I don't see them going back onto Twitter.
Well, so he may not come back. I mean, I think he probably should. I mean, he's got like 83 million followers over there and counting. Or, one strategy for him would be to post on Truth Social and then copy the post on Truth and then move it over and post just a screenshot on Twitter. And then, he could sort of do the thing that a lot of people do. Like, I think a lot of people do that on Instagram, right? Or actually people will take the tweet, post it on Instagram, or post the Instagram, post it on Twitter. And so Trump could do that, but we are asking ourselves, is he sort of contractually prohibited from doing something like that? Or is he just really focused on Truth? And to be honest, Truth is not a bad platform, right? I'm on Truth Social. Shout out, to everybody on Truth Social. I think that it is, it's a much smaller ecosystem, obviously. Twitter's much bigger than that. And so, I think if Trump really does want more eyeballs, which is what you need in a campaign, yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer. You got to go back on Twitter in some way, shape, or form. But I don't think you have to necessarily, ditch the old platform. And the people who are there are, tired of, they want a voice. They want a place where they can be free. And so I don't think it's right to them either to abandon the platform, because they've been, the most loyal people. And I think that what Trump is doing there is sort of speaking to that, which is the right call. So he's got to kind of find the medium, right? What's the right balance on the right social media platform? But he has the option if he wants it. He's back on Twitter. And so, of course, we'll continue to follow him and others and see if anything changes. And what I'm most interested in, of course, is the U.S. federal government coming to investigate him, which I think is going to be their next move, but we'll see. We'll continue to follow. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for liking this video wherever it is you are watching us, because I look forward to seeing you on the next one. All right, and so we're sticking with Trump for a little bit. We've got a second segment on this because there was a weird thing. They all got the memo. Something strange. Hey, Joshua G says, I click the heart for everything you post on Truth. Well, thank you, Joshua G. It's very nice. Look at that. Well, I appreciate you for doing that. Yeah, I like Truth. It's actually very easy to read. It's got a nice dark mode. It's nice. Yeah. All right. So let's get right back into it, shall we? What do we got? 3 U.S. attorney generals are now beating the media drum, saying Donald Trump is getting indicted. It's probably coming. It's probably coming in hot. Some of these people are conservative-ish. Some of them are friendly to, or were friendly to Trump. Others are not at all. But we're going to start with Bill Barr. We'll check out Neal, Katyal. We've got former U.S. Attorney General Alberto Gonzalez. And then we'll pick it up with the Republicans who sort of close the loop on this and say, well, these investigations, special counsel, special master, all of the inquiries all across this country, they may continue moving forward, but the Republicans might have a strategy to defund them, which of course we will see if that works. But first, let's talk about Bill Barr. Bill Barr, former U.S. Attorney General for Donald Trump, is out giving very interesting interviews, and he's trying to find a happy medium between supporting Trump and explaining the criminal process as he sees it. And watch how this unfolds, because Barr is communicating that he sort of agrees that Trump is kind of in some hot water and may have done some criminal acts, but he'd still vote for the guy.
Documents. Those are serious charges.
That's a serious
That's
enough
serious.
crime. That's a serious
well,
enough crime.
I said that I personally think that they probably have the basis for legitimately indicting the president. I don't know. I'm speculating.
You're speculating, yeah.
But given what's gone on, I think they probably have the evidence that would check the box. They have the case.
And if they have,
he's right about that, I think. Okay, we've gone through the statutes, we've read through the search warrant, we've read through the law, all of these. If you want to boil it down to sort of the simplest statutory violations, it's very simple. It's like possession of defense national information. Okay, defense, DNI, defense, whatever that stands for. Simple possession of these documents that are labeled that way, right, is something that the feds think that they can charge, more or less, whether you agree with it or not. If you read the statute, it's like, that's it. And, you see these often in like, trespass cases. It's like, are you physically here? Yes or no? Okay, you're physically there, then we can charge you with that. So kind of the same thing here. Physical possession is enough. And that's why, people like Bill Barr and others have been saying all they got to do is just check the boxes. It's kind of it's a technicality, right? You call it a technicality, but it's not. It's actually a violation of the law. And so they're going to pursue that. And why else would they be bringing up a special counsel and all of that, in order to create a show that's kind of much ado about nothing? Or is this where they're going? Here's Bill.
but should they?
That's a decision for...
If you were AG, would you?
I'm not going to get into that.
Do you think they will?
Yes.
I think it's becoming increasingly more likely.
Yeah.
And you think it would be appropriate if they did?
Well, this is what the Attorney General gets paid, these kinds of decisions. The argument for doing it is that if you let someone like this who, if the facts are as raw as they may be, and you let someone get away with it, how can you protect these secrets? How can you insist on people in government taking this stuff seriously?
Okay, so I don't buy that argument. Okay, the argument he's making is, well, if Trump is able to just walk away with defense information and he can just sort of keep it in his, briefcase at Mar-a-Lago or in boxes or whatever, then that shows a disrespect for national defense information. And that means that, the whole defense industry is going to just sort of loosen up and explode, right? Everything is just going to go into chaotic oblivion if Donald Trump is allowed to escape liability. And this is kind of the deterrence argument that you'll hear in criminal law. Well, if we let him go free, who else is going to do it? Nobody's above the law. If Trump escapes this, well, then everybody else is going to cheat on their taxes, or everybody else is going to open up Trump universities, or everybody else is going to have fake P tapes or whatever, right? It's the deterrence argument. Now, that said, Donald Trump is sort of in an excluded category, I would say, for the deterrence effect, given that he held the office of being the chief executor of the law, right? He was the chief executive. He was the president of the United States, which means sort of every single power you could possibly muster and shove into the executive branch, he's got it. Okay, so it's different. He's different than your standard, let's say, mid-level or high-level FBI agent who doesn't have those same authorities. So Donald Trump does have some of those special privileges. He gets to show up at 9 a.m., okay? You have to be at your desk at 8. He can show up at 9. Why? Because he's the president, man. And that's what it is. So if he wants to take these documents and move them around, right? And you say, we're not going to prosecute him for that. Why? He's the president. You can thread that needle easily. This idea that if Trump escapes, that the whole rest of the country is going to go bananas is ridiculous. He was the president. Nobody else is. It's a select few people who get that designation.
So that's an important thing to weigh, as well as what what it will do to the country and to the office of the presidency. And I think Merrick Garland is going to have to make that call.
Yeah, and it sets a very bad precedent because now the Republicans can do this also. And I honestly, it's a sad state. And I've said this many times here. It's a sad state of affairs when these are the tools that our political parties are using against each other. But if the Democrats are going to raid the Republican homes, the Republicans have to raid the Democrats' homes. That's just how it is. It's an existential crisis now. Okay, they are using, swords and machetes and lightsabers, and the Republicans are out here banging around pots and pans with some sticks. So it's about to get real if you want to cross that line.
If Donald Trump were the nominee for the Republican Party again, would you support him?
Well, I'm just hoping it never comes to that, because I think it would be a tragedy if he's our nominee, if he's the Republican nominee.
Could you vote against him? Could you vote not for the Republican if Donald Trump were the Republican nominee?
Well, again, I think it gets down to what I said, which is I would have to make the judgment at that point, the impact on the country, and I'll have to see what's going on in the world, who the Democratic nominee is. If it's a progressive Democratic nominee, I can't imagine voting for him.
But ideologically progressive versus somebody who orchestrated an attack on the Capitol, who betrayed his oath to the Constitution, as you said in your words, you still might vote for him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Depending on all this. It's hard for me to project what the future holds. The question is always a comparative one. You have to make a choice between two people. I don't believe in throwing my vote away on a third party.
You don't rule out supporting President Trump again?
No, I don't. Depends on the circumstances.
Yeah, I'd vote for him again. Yeah, no problem. Wait, you said he was a constitutional thief and insurrectionist who almost wrecked the whole country, and you'd vote for him? Yeah. Yeah, why not? Yeah, because he's not as bad as your psycho candidates. Okay, your candidates are a lot more psycho, and you guys have done a lot worse things. Is probably where he wanted to go with this, but he's not going to go there. So yeah, it's a very interesting answer from Bill Barr, and you can see he's sort of straddling both sides of this thing, right? He says, yeah, honestly, there does appear to be enough there to indict him, and it's probably going to happen. And the thing about Bill Barr is, if he really, I think if you got him with a beer, off the record, you really say, what are they, what's your real opinion of this bill? And I think you'd hear some good answers, and probably wouldn't be that far off from some of the same things we're talking about here. But that is Bill Barr. Might be a Trump supporter, even if he is indicted. We'll, of course, wait and see. But Barr is not alone. Other attorney generals were making similar arguments. This is former U.S. Attorney General Neal Katyal, and he is very confident that Donald Trump is getting indicted. He says it's a foregone conclusion. It's going to be happening any minute now. We've been waiting for 6 years, but now it's finally coming.
I know that there are a lot of people, including a lot of our viewers, who are really upset with how the Mueller investigation turned out in the end. There were certainly a lot of successful indictments that were brought, but not against some of the main higher-ups, including Donald Trump.
That's what they wanted.
The fact that that didn't happen in Mueller doesn't, to me, say anything about what would happen here. These are very separate animals, and Mar-a-Lago is, in my mind, an open and shut investigation. It is, there's no doubt in my mind that if I did this or you did this, we'd be in jail right now.
You're not the president, Neal. He is. So what kind of comparison is that?
We certainly wouldn't get a special master or a special counsel or prosecutor or the like. It would be a very easy case. It's not that different. It's just the identity of the person, Donald Trump, that makes it different. But at the end of the day,
it's a little detail, just a minor detail. Other FBI agents who have been engaged in espionage and all that stuff. Yeah, they didn't have the right to have those documents. Okay, Trump did have the right to have those documents. It is what he argues, and we're now learning from the Washington Post and others that many of those documents weren't these big, catastrophic national security items. These were mementos. These were memorabilia. These were things that Donald Trump thought that they were rightfully his. They belong in the presidential library. They were probably going to go in the presidential library anyways. So they just sort of took a detour from the National Archives to Trump. They're going to go back to the National Archives and then back into the Trump presidential library. So they're like literally library books, okay, is all they are. And he's saying that Trump's distinction as the president apparently doesn't afford him any, like ultra user modes. Don't you sort of have like God mode power then against certain things? Yeah.
I expect that Donald Trump will be indicted by this special counsel, and this move to appoint a special counsel, we can debate its pros and cons. I do think it's going to take a little more time than it would have otherwise, but ultimately I think we will get to the same result when it comes to Mar-a-Lago.
Now, there are a lot of pros and cons on this issue, and one of them, of course, is, well, a special counsel brings Donald Trump some good protection, right? And this is an argument that we've been making for a long time here. It's very partisan and political to have the current administration, which is Joe Biden, who has indicated multiple times he's going to run again, if you believe that, them saying he's going to run again and having his Department of Justice within the executive branch through Attorney General Merrick Garland prosecuting Donald Trump is insane. It was insane from the first minute. It was a lunatic thing to do ever since they raided his private residence. It was insane. Okay, they did it anyways. Why? Because there's a whole slew of reasons I'm sure we could unpack there, but they did it. They crossed that bridge when they didn't even look back, and they sat there and they told all of us in America with straight faces that this was nicely separated, that there was no conflict of interest. In fact, Joe Biden didn't even know about it. He didn't even know about the raid. Merrick Garland sat on it for 3 weeks. He didn't even tell his boss about it, raiding a former president. Nuts. Okay, absolutely insane behavior. But they did it. And our argument was a special counsel is much more appropriate because at least there's this fake division, right? There's this presumed division that you separate this out from the regular executive branch so that it is in private. So there at least isn't a conflict with Biden prosecuting Trump, which is nuts. And so they did. They appointed a special counsel. Now, the downside to that is that this special counsel is, sort of like, prosecutor extraordinaire. He's like, Captain America, anti-Trumper. He's somebody who worked over there at The Hague. He's been prosecuting in the International Criminal Court, probably hates Donald Trump and conservatives, and is, from all we have seen, a pretty sharp dude with a lot of experience and probably a lot of energy to go after this. It's not going to be the same thing that we saw with Robert Mueller, who was just kind of, farting around from place to place as he was waiting for this indictment to come, and then nothing ever happened. So now we get somebody who is competent. They've got a whole new set of motivations to really go after him. And we've got a special counsel assigned. So what are the pros? What are the cons? This is former Attorney General Alberto Gonzalez, who says, in fact, this is kind of a good deal for Trump. Special counsel might protect his interests in a way that other protections wouldn't. And so Attorney General Alberto Gonzalez says that this is actually a good thing.
In my mind, there's no question that he made the right call. The world fundamentally changed with respect to how you approach cases with the announcement by President Trump that he was going to run against the man who appointed Merrick Garland. And so absolutely, Merrick Garland did the absolute right thing. And, to hear Trump rail against this as an abuse of power to me is kind of silly, because this move was intended to protect his interests, to protect his rights, to make it clear to the American people that this is about independence and accountability, as General Garland said. So, yes, I think this was the right decision, and it came at the appropriate time.
Alberto Gonzalez says that the special counsel is actually going to help protect Trump. And I think, there's some truth to that. We'll have to see how this whole thing unfolds, but very interesting. Sort of 3 for 3. We had 3 attorney generals out there all conversating about this this new development. And when you start to see those patterns, we start to ask ourselves, is there something coming? Do they see something that we don't know, or is this all just a big giant coincidence? Who knows? But this is Jim Jordan. Now, as the Democrats plot on Trump to try to have this special counsel find something that they can indict him with, we see the Republicans are responding. They're, of course, taking control of the House of Representatives at the turn of the year. Jim Jordan and others are saying this is a big problem, and we have a plan to deal with it.
And then this week, 3 days after President Trump announces he's running for president, 1 day after Mr. Comer did his press conference, guess what? Merrick Garland says we're going to put in as the special counsel the very individual who was at the Justice Department and was looking for ways to prosecute the people Lois Lerner and Obama's IRS targeted. If that's not a political Justice Department, I don't know what is. So this is why we're going to look into this issue, and we're going to get to the bottom of everything they've been doing at the politicized
DOJ, the politicized DOJ, the corrupt FBI, these people who have made it their purview to go after certain classes of Americans called domestic violent extremists and homegrown violent terrorists and all this crap, right? That's something that they're very, very interested in. And Donald Trump, you know, is sort of the tip of the spear on that, right? They want him, but they have not stopped with him. They've labeled everybody who even thinks about Donald Trump as a MAGA extremist who's responsible for the insurrection of America. So Jim Jordan says that when the Republicans are in charge, they will be investigating this very thoroughly. And he's not alone. He's got Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I think was unsuspended, unbanned from YouTube. No, from Twitter. Shout out to MTG. Welcome back on Twitter. But she said previously, Republicans will need to refuse to appropriate any funding to Merrick Garland's special counsel and defund any part of the DOJ acting on behalf of the Democrat Party as a taxpayer-funded campaign arm for the Democrats' 2024 presidential nominee. Going after the money. Power of the purse at the federal government and the House of Representatives. Marjorie says we're going to just defund them. Sort of like defund the police. Defund the FBI. Defund the DOJ, defund the special counsel. I like it. And so many speculating that the Trump indictment is coming. Of course, we will continue to follow. Thank you for liking this video. Thank you for subscribing wherever it is you're watching this, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one. All right, and so now we're going to get into some legal heavy lifting a little bit. We've got student loans, and then we've got Jen Psaki is going to be sitting for a deposition soon. Is Zulu here? Where's Zulu? Is Zulu in the house? Get your Psaki GIFs ready because it's coming up. Not on this segment, in the next one. But after this one, Biden appeals to the United States Supreme Court. He got obliterated in various locations around this country when he tried to cram down our gullets, the student loan program. Many courts have said that's unconstitutional. You don't have authority to do that. There's no power in the executive branch to do that, but they did it anyways. And now, since they've lost in multiple circuit courts, we're going to check in with their recent filing at the United States Supreme Court, the Biden administration asking SCOTUS to reverse the lower level court so that the student loan bill, or if it wasn't a bill, the student loan executive order gets passed so that they can continue on with wrecking the rest of the country. But remember, we saw that the power of the presidency does not include the ability to cancel loans. Nancy Pelosi communicated this to us some time ago. People have been asking Congress for a long time, can you please cancel our loans? If you can't do it, can the president do it? Can Biden just do this, Nancy?
People think that the president of the United States, is this more on the subject than you ever want to know? Will you let me know? People think that the president of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress.
Oh, but it wasn't an act of Congress. This was an executive order that was signed by Joe Biden. He just decided to pass it. And even though it has been found illegal by various other courts around the country, The Biden administration still says that those loans are being processed. Here on CNN is the Biden people or reporters telling us that even though the courts have stopped this student loan forgiveness program, the Biden administration is still processing these.
Well, the Biden administration isn't letting legal challenges stop them from letting people know they're approved for student debt relief. The Education Department is just starting to notify applicants that their requests have been approved, with one important caveat: they can't actually give them the money because lawsuits. CNN's Jeremy Diamond joins us now. Jeremy, you've got a feel for people. They apply for this relief. They're told they're going to get it, but they can't because it's all tied up in the courts. So how is the administration handling this?
So in other words, they were lied to, right? That's what that means. Okay, these people were told. Who told them? It wasn't like they went outside and they found a random letter on the ground. Oh, I wonder where this came from. I guess I'll believe it. No, this was intentional. There was an entire plan around this. The administration, the Biden administration told them this very specifically. It didn't happen naturally, organically.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Paul. A lot of people in limbo right now. You may remember that a whopping 26 million people applied for the student debt relief. And beginning yesterday, the Department of Education began notifying the roughly 16 million people who were approved for this student debt forgiveness program. But in that same letter, they also let those people know that they aren't going to be able to approve those funds as of yet while these challenges play out. The Secretary of Education in this letter to folks who he's notifying says, quote, unfortunately, a number of lawsuits have been filed challenging the program, which have blocked our ability to discharge your debt at present. We believe strongly that the lawsuits are meritless and the Department of Justice has appealed on our behalf.
They have, right? That's the Supreme Court filing that we're going to read here in a minute. But meritless, what are you crazy? I mean, multiple courts around this country have decided that this is an unconstitutional thing that you did. And as a recap, right, they used this as this is a COVID emergency plot.
He goes on to say that the Department of Education will discharge the approved debt if and when we prevail in court. That is, of course, the big question right now, because earlier in the week, we saw the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals issue a nationwide injunction against the program. The Biden administration on Friday asking the Supreme Court to allow the program to go into effect while those legal challenges play out. The other question that remains is whether or not President Biden is going to decide to extend that moratorium on student loan repayments. You may recall that payment freeze, which has been in effect throughout the COVID pandemic, it was set to end on January 1st, coinciding with this student debt program. The White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, on Friday saying only that the president is examining all potential options, but the White House really putting the onus on those Republican-led states that have been pushing to sue and to end this program.
They're suing because it's unconstitutional. And so you can see how this whole narrative is being generated. Republicans are bad. Biden wanted to give you that money, but the Republicans are suing. And the Republican Supreme Court, when they deny cert or when they rule against us, it's going to be those dang Republicans, those 6 conservatives on there who took away your money. And it's going to be that whole saga again, because everything that this administration does is overtly political. Even when it is something that is obvious. I think every constitutional scholar, everybody who's looked at this said the executive, even Nancy Pelosi says there is no ability to have the president do what he did, and he did it. So we'll check in with Karine Jean-Pierre. Then we're going to read the entire, not the entire brief, but we'll read a big portion of it right after we check in with our friends at Goldco. If you've got a 401k, an IRA, or a savings account, you know as well as I do that things are scary out there. The Biden administration has already printed more money in the past 2 years than the previous 100 years combined. National debt, record 30 trillion. Inflation's the highest we've seen since 1982. It's only a matter of time until the house of cards comes crashing down. If you have retirement savings, your money could be at serious risk. Talk to my friends at Goldco. See how you can protect your retirement in gold and silver before it's too late. Go to robertlikesgold.com. They'll give you $10,000 or more in free silver when you open a qualifying account. That's over at robertlikesgold.com. Amazing company. A+ rated with the Better Business Bureau, and we all love gold, especially at robertlikesgold.com. All right. And so now, my friends, we have to ask ourselves about inflation because, as we know, we are going to go Thanksgiving shopping and it's going to be very expensive out there. Hey, Karine Jean-Pierre, you know this student loan ordeal that you're cramming through, is this going to have any impact on inflation for us?
Loans. Has the administration analyzed any potential inflationary effects of student loan forgiveness?
Again, by making those comments is kind of connected to what the federal officials.
Okay, full-blown stop,
Okay.
nothing to do with the Fed.
Well, that's the way you asked the question, so that's the way I was answering the question.
Inflation.
Analyzed any potential inflationary effects of student loan forgiveness, the plan that the administration has enacted?
It's a good question that you're asking, but look.
It is a good question.
The president has always, I don't have any data to share with you on that particular question, but the president has been very clear. He wants to make sure that he's lowering cost for the American people. He feels that the student debt relief, especially as we were talking about lifting the pause at the end of this year, he wanted to make sure that he was giving those families, those American middle-class families, a little bit of a breathing room.
Okay, so he's actually not going to lower costs at all, right? He's just going to increase money that they get for free to reduce their already paid for expenditures, but he's not reducing costs for anything coming in, right? I think that's part of the problem. It's like, are we going to solve this thing or not? Like, is the student loan problem going to continue to grow? Like, are students going to continue to be buried in debt that they can't repay, or what's the deal? Well, they don't really have much answers for us. No idea on whether it impacts inflation or not. The White House is just totally clueless. It sounds good. They want it done. The actual consequences that might exist in reality, be damned. Nobody cares about those. Okay, so let's take a look now with all of that backdrop at the actual student loan filing. You can see the Biden administration files in the Supreme Court of the United States, Joe Biden versus the state of Nebraska. Application to vacate the judgment from the lower level court at the 8th Circuit. Remember that the states have sued the Biden administration. There's several different lawsuits. Now we are at the Supreme Court. The parties, of course, Joe Biden, President of the United States. The respondents are the states, Nebraska, Missouri, Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, South Carolina. We've got these other two cases that we've been following along, Nebraska versus Biden. And here's what they say. They say, pursuant to the rules, we are here in front of you, Supreme Court. Let's begin. They write, Congress charged the Secretary of Education, who's Miguel Cardona, with administering the federal student loan programs. Because borrowers who default their student loans face severe financial consequences, including wage garnishment, credit damage, and other things, they say that Congress specifically gave the Secretary of Education permission to waive or to do things that ensure borrowers who are affected by a national emergency are not worse off in relation to their loans. And they cite this law for us, the HEROES Act, in the U.S. Code. And so they say that's the basis, right? That's why they have the ability to do all this stuff. They write, confronted with the deadliest pandemic in the nation's history, which has wreaked global economic havoc. Did the pandemic do that, or did you guys do that? Both the Trump and the Biden administrations invoked the HEROES Act to pause repayment obligations and suspend interest accrual on all federal loans since 2020. Now, that's different than waiving federal loans. Okay. The pause is estimated to have cost the government more than $100 billion. Of course, but they don't care. Lock everything down, waive everything anyways. Nobody cares. It's just money. In August 2022, Biden's in charge, the Secretary, Miguel Cardona, determined that across-the-board pause on all payments for all borrowers should come to an end. We have to stop all of that. And directed the department to restart loan payments at the end of the year. But the Secretary, Miguel, also found that when repayment obligations resume, lower-income borrowers will be at a heightened risk of delinquency and default because of the continuing economic consequences of the pandemic. The Secretary thus directed the department to issue up to $10,000 in student loan relief for people with annual incomes under $125,000, those very poor people. Yes. The lower income borrowers who make less than $125,000. They're going to be hit pretty hard. Yeah. Okay. So qualifying Pell Grant recipients who are at greater risk of default, they get $20,000. Okay. This relief, the secretary found, is necessary to ensure the delinquency and default rates would not spike above pre-pandemic levels. Now, respondents are a group of 6 states that challenged our plan, those pesky states suing us. The district court dismissed their suit because they didn't have standing, but the 8th Circuit granted their request for a universal injunction pending appeal. And so we're going to see there's a standing argument in here that we're going to skip through. Standing, of course, you know, we've covered this. I can't even tell you how much back after the election. Basically, every lawsuit was a standing lawsuit. I can't take it anymore. But it's the idea that, you know, you can't even bring a suit. You don't even have the ability to sue because you don't have standing. You don't have a proper claim, right? It's like if you if somebody was injured in an accident and you're suing for damages, but you weren't in the accident, why should you be compensated for anything? It's not your claim. You don't have standing to file a lawsuit against the other driver. You weren't even there that day. You were in the Bahamas. So there's no basis for that. Same thing here. Why are you even suing us? You don't have the authority to sue us. You have no standing. So that has been rectified in the 8th Circuit. The 8th Circuit said, no, they've got standing. Leave it alone. In so doing, they say the court did not analyze the merits of the claim. The court's discussion of the merits only included the following statement, which is very brief. It says the merits of the appeal has substantial questions of law that remain to be resolved. So they say this analysis is not appropriate. In other words, Supreme Court, and therefore don't allow this injunction to take place. The injunction, which is what's stopping Biden's loan program from going into effect. Basically, don't write the checks, right? They basically have the checks ready to go in the mail, and they're asking for permission to do that. They say this court should vacate that injunction, which is stopping the mailing of the checks. Respondents lack standing, and on the merits, the states don't have any ability to challenge this. They say the plan falls directly within the secretary's authority. The entire purpose of this act is to deal with the national emergency, and we're dealing with a national emergency, is what they say. They say the 8th Circuit erroneous injunction now leaves millions in limbo, vulnerable borrowers who might be put in a very bad position. Yeah, you know what's shocking about that is that they did that. Who created this status of limbo? They could have passed this through Congress easily. They had both houses. Now they don't. Saying that now these people are uncertain about their debt and unable to make that financial decision. Yeah, because they promised something that didn't come to fruition. Maybe they shouldn't have done that. If this court declines to vacate the injunction, a lot of people are going to be in a lot of pain. Okay. I don't doubt that. I actually believe that. I bet that people, honestly, I bet people went out, started paying down bills, took, money that they didn't have and applied it to certain things that they didn't need or that they shouldn't have paid off at the moment, because this is not ever anything that's gone through. So the people, right, are going to turn their focus, turn their ire towards the Republicans when really the Democrats put them in this position in the first place. They give us some background. They say that the Education Act gives the Secretary of Education some powers, right? He has the powers to do certain things. For example, a few months after 9/11, after the terrorist attacks, the Secretary was provided with certain abilities, declared a national emergency, waived or modified some loans. In 2003, Congress expanded that, said that they could waive or modify statutory loans and put in some different objectives. The HEROES Act was set to expire in 2005, but it didn't. In March 2020, President Trump declared a national emergency. In fact, that was the start of the show, March 2020, the birth date of Watching the Watchers. Proclamation was issued. The declaration remains in effect. The government has declared all 50 states to be disaster areas. Pandemic also inflicted severe economic harms and so on. In response, the federal government provided substantial relief to borrowers with department-held loans, saying that we're going to pause repayment and all of the interest will start being accrued or delayed. But then we fast forward. In August 2022, Secretary Cardona from the Department of Education, he determined that despite all of those measures, despite years of delayed repayment, any resumption of repayment obligations would put many lower income borrowers, the $125,000 a year people, at heightened risk of loan delinquency due to the pandemic. The secretary adopted a two-prong approach. He announced that he would extend the pause one final time through December 31st. And to ensure that borrowers are not in a worse position to repay their loans, saying that up to $10,000 is going to be just given away to people who make less than $125,000. As explained in the supporting analysis on which Secretary Cardona relied, they write, this relief will mitigate the pandemic's adverse economic effects and significantly reduce delinquency and default rates for those affected by the pandemic, which was interesting. You know, I never applied for this or did anything, in this regard, but did they means test? Like, did they ask you, like certain qualifying questions? Like, are these people who are getting this money actually impacted by the pandemic? Or like, did some of these people work at Zoom or something, like got jobs, promotions, raises, all of it, I don't know. Or do you just get $10,000 blank check just by applying? I think it's the latter, right? I don't think they're like means testing or doing anything like this. So it's actually speculating that they're among those most affected by the pandemic, but I would guess that there's probably a bigger subclass of people who are more impacted. Probably like, I don't know, less than half of that, right? Cut that number in half and see maybe if you can help those people first. I don't know, but who knows? Okay, the department analyzed its past experience with borrowers who transitioned back to repayment after long periods of forbearance. Indeed, defaults rates increased 20-fold after the periods of non-payment. It's going to happen anyways. The department reviewed borrower surveys. They did face-to-face conversations. They say that there's a stark increase in the number of borrowers that anticipate difficulty making loan payments. Yeah, it's not going to be good. Acute inflationary pressures on households. The department also emphasized substantial penalties imposed on borrowers who default. Yeah, when these student loans, when they flip this switch back on, when they say everybody's got to start paying again, it's not going to be pretty. The department explained that the contemplated debt relief would ameliorate these harms. The department surveyed economic data, said anybody with less than $125,000, especially Pell Grants, they're going to be really hit hard. And so I guess $10,000 is going to mitigate that risk. We'll see. Now, there were a bunch of proceedings that took place below. Of course, we'll fast forward through all of this. October 20th, prior standing arguments here. A lot of this is procedural history, so we'll fast forward through all of that. We get to some argument and we see some law. So we'll fast forward through some of the law. Let's hit the highlights here. Okay, this is the standing portion of the lawsuit, right? They say this is the federal government. This is Biden saying the states don't have standing. And as we've talked about, this is one of the most, obnoxious parts of the law oftentimes. They say that there's basically no direct harm to the state of Missouri because it's representing an entity. The entity really has standing and so on and so forth. So we're going to fast forward through that. This is the area that sort of goes directly to the constitutional law that I think is most interesting here. It's whether or not Miguel Cardona, whether his action in saying, I have the power. Okay, yes, Donald Trump delayed the student loans. Let's say we just take that issue out. Okay, all presidents have the ability to delay the loans. National emergency, they're not due, postpone them for whatever. Let's just say we all agree on that, just so we can take it out of the conversation. Well, there's still this new power that they wrote in there that says that they can just go now give people $10,000 for you, $20,000 for you, depending on what type of loan you have. Where'd that power come from? Where did that constitutional authority emerge? Let's find out. They say that the states are arguing that Miguel Cardona's plan exceeds his statutory authority and it's arbitrary and capricious. In other words, the law is written in law, it's codified, and he's operating outside of the law. They say without addressing either contention in substance, the Court of Appeals issued an injunction, but neither contention is persuasive. They're saying, okay, listen, they made their arguments, the Court of Appeals made their arguments, and forget all that. Let us tell you, Supreme Court, what's really up here. They write, okay, the HEROES Act, notwithstanding any other provision of the law, it says it right, and they're quoting the law, it says the secretary may, quote, respond to national emergencies as the secretary deems necessary. See that? Necessary. To ensure that any affected individuals are not placed in a worse position financially. And they went through the law and they picked out all the sentences that most made sense for them. And they said, oh, look, it's right here. So it's like if you went through like a full book and you just picked out like the couple sentences that made your argument. And you're like, yeah, That's beautiful. That's basically what they did. They wrote, notwithstanding any other provision of the law, Secretary may respond to a national emergency as the Secretary deems necessary to ensure, whatever that means, that nobody's placed in a worse position financially. Therefore, we've got the authority to do this. And then they say, there you go, it's right there. Look at this. Look at this, court. It's right there. It's plain as day. And they say, obviously, COVID was a national emergency. And they say all student loan borrowers are, quote, affected individuals. And also, they reside or employed in the 50 states, which we have authority over. And the Secretary, Miguel, he deemed, you see that, deemed, that the lower income people needed this provision. And the act gives us power to do all of it. He said that he deemed that the borrowers were at a particularly high rate of delinquency. And so that's it. That's all we need. Now, he says that the respondents, the states, have asserted that the plan is trying to put these borrowers in a better position, right? They actually have sort of a windfall. And they say, no, that's not true. Okay, well, it's a national emergency. Here it's a COVID-19 pandemic. They say the evidence before the secretary showed that borrowers with individual incomes less than $125K or households below $250K face the highest risk of delinquency and default. Now, the states have responded that the HEROES Act is supposed to be temporary and that all of these other solutions are permanent. Previous invocations of the HEROES Act also had substantial economic effects. They're saying, hey, Trump did some of this too. Trump didn't grant everybody a waiver or cancel $10,000 or $20,000, but he did give them financial benefits. And so we're doing that just a little bit harder than he did. They say previously the federal government spent a ton of money on this stuff, something like, reducing borrower money from $300 to $200 a month, income-based repayments, conversations taking place, and that previous invocations have afforded relief on a class-wide basis. Okay, this is the other sort of constitutional question that we have. Why 125,000 people? A blanket application to everybody? Like, shouldn't it be more of a direct sort of subjective analysis? I mean, what if somebody's making $125,000 a year at they have almost no expenses, right? Let's say for, whatever the situation is, but you have another person who's making $125,000 a year, who's dead broke, right? He's living in a high cost of living area or whatever. Both of them should get $10,000, right? And then you start to, okay, well, I guess if you means test that, then why wouldn't you mean test the whole thing? And then now somebody's getting privileges that somebody else isn't getting. And so now you run into also equal protection of the law issues. Okay, this crap is messy, which is why we don't do it. But here, respondents have invoked 4 major questions saying the states are trying to fight back against all of this. Let's fast forward a little bit through their arguments. They're also communicating, saying that Miguel Cardona, who is the person who sort of rewrote this according to his own mind, they're saying that it's not arbitrary, it's not capricious. And they give us some examples of prior examples where Secretary of Education has found in prior historical context that this stuff is appropriate. Says that an agency does not need to consider every alternative through the conceivable mind of man. Okay, he doesn't have to come up with every other solution. This is a good enough solution. And they say that's about all they need. They're also responding to the 8th Circuit. They're saying the lower level court was overbroad. They shouldn't have allowed the injunction to stay. And they're responding to the 8th Circuit here. So let's fast forward through the rest of this. In conclusion, the Biden administration at the Supreme Court, they say, this court should vacate or at a minimum narrow the injunction pending appeal that was entered by the lower level court. If, however, the court declines to vacate the injunction, it may wish to construe this application as a petition for a writ of certiorari before judgment, grant the petition, and set this case for an expedited briefing and argument this term. Signed by Elizabeth B. Prelogard, Solicitor General for the United States, November 22nd, 2022, going up to the United States Supreme Court. And so she's basically saying either, reverse this injunction and allow us to send out the checks, to mail out the student loan checks, or allow us to brief this more fully for you. So if you're not going to sort of give us the order that we want, consider this an actual petition for a writ of certiorari so that we can brief this more fully. And we'll see what the court does. We'll be waiting for the United States Supreme Court to respond to this. I mean, they could come back and grant it and vacate the injunction. If they come back and they say yes on this, you can imagine that those checks are going to be flying out of the Department of Treasury before they can claw those back. That's really what they want. They want to get that money out, because once it's out, you're not going to be able to get it back. So that is the latest on the Biden appeal on the student loan saga. And so we'll continue to cover that one, of course. And I appreciate you subscribing and liking this video wherever it is you're watching this, so that we can see you on the next one. All right. And we've got one final segment before we wrap it up for the day. And if you're on YouTube, get those Jen Psaki emojis out, because she's going to be doing a lot of talking, not today, but soon enough. A lot of talking from Jen Psaki, who's going to be sitting for a depo very, very soon. All right. And let's get right into it, shall we? Jen Psaki is going to be sitting for a deposition. She did not want to. Her lawyers really didn't want her to. They filed all sorts of motions to quash. Can we please just kind of keep her out of this whole thing? She's not even in the Biden administration anymore. She doesn't work for him. She's at MSNBC now. Just leave her alone. Judge said, no, not going to happen. And it is a lot of fun. We've got several different motions to attend to. The first is going to be actually something a little bit interesting. It's a notice. Now, this is Jen Psaki. She filed in a different court because she tried to sort of forum shop a little bit. She wanted to get another judge to give her a nice ruling. And the judge said, it's going over to the actual court where your case is being held. Sorry. So we're going to look at that. They refer us to Jen Psaki's reply. And remember, the way that these motions work, the government who is suing the Biden administration because they're saying that there's big tech collusion taking place. This is all emanating from a lawsuit where Biden is being challenged for colluding with Facebook, colluding with Twitter, colluding with big tech. Psaki has said she doesn't want to be deposed. The states have filed basically a subpoena, a request for a deposition for her, and she has responded with a motion to quash. So she files the motion to quash, the states respond, and then she files a reply. So we're going to look at that. And a long explanation to say we're reading Jen Psaki's last words on the whole argument before we take a look at the order from the judge. And we'll take a look at all of it right back to back. So let's get right into it. First and foremost, this is the original notice saying that the motion is being transferred. Well, that's weird. What's going on here? Well, you'll notice that they put on page 1 of 3 that Jen Psaki's lawyers are responding to this case, State of Missouri versus Joe Biden. And they say, Judge, they say on November 1st, 2022, the states served a third-party subpoena on Jen Psaki, former White House press secretary, ordering her to appear for a deposition in the Eastern District of Virginia, December 8th, coming up. On November 3rd, Ms. Psaki, through lawyers and the government, moved the district court for Virginia to quash the subpoena, saying we don't want to show up. A hearing was held on motions November 18th, and the court transferred the motions to quash to this court. Jen was in a different court, coming over to this court, and they say, pursuant to that, we now have motions here, Judge. This is Jen's lawyers explaining what happened. So they tell the judge, all right, well, we were in a different court, and so we're going to be filing all this here with you now, and we're providing you notice. They say, here's what we've got. All of these are briefed, ready for you, Judge, and they're ripe for your decision, which we're going to read. We've got Jen Psaki's motion, a brief in support, supporting exhibits, and a bunch of other stuff all attached. And they say the legal standards to quash a motion, quash a deposition for high-ranking officials has been articulated, and therefore we ask for an expedited ruling because Jen Psaki, she is scheduled for a depo soon. They say, additionally, defendants request that if the court denies the motion, that all of the other things remain in effect. Counsel for defendants have conferred with Psaki, who stated that Psaki consents to the relief. Therefore, Judge, they say all of this is being attached from Adam Kirshner, senior trial counsel, other lawyers from the U.S. Department of Justice, all coming in here to let the court know we're filing these motions. Now, here is the actual motion. Okay, so now it's filed in 2 different places. You see 2 different case numbers. One was filed in a different district and they transferred it over, and they're just giving us notice that it's sort of being refiled. Now, this is Jen Psaki's final reply. Okay, so she files a motion to quash. States respond, say, no, we want to depo you. She says, I get the final word. That's what this is. Jen Psaki's reply to the states who want her deposed, she says, I am trying to quash that subpoena. I don't want to talk about anything. We have a preliminary statement. They write, the state's opposition to Psaki and her motion to quash the subpoena fails to demonstrate that any supposed need for Psaki's testimony to craft an injunction against the government, right? In other words, the states want the government to stop colluding with big tech. So they're saying that, look, any ability that Jen Psaki has to help you craft an injunction against the federal government, it's not worth it. It outweighs the significant burdens imposed on her in preparing and sitting for a deposition as a non-party former high-ranking official. She was a press secretary. She doesn't even know anything anymore. And the states say that they want this thing. They want to stop the government for colluding with big tech. Jen Psaki's not even in the government anymore, is what they're saying. And if you bring her in to depose her, it's going to just, she's got, a bunch of gigs on MSNBC, a bunch of, monologues to type up and witty tweets. She's busy. So as a result, the subpoena should be quashed. This is Jen writing, as unduly burdensome in light of Ms. Psaki's status as a non-party private citizen, right? All of these little creatures just get out of the government and they used, I'm a private citizen. The extensive information already available in the state's record, they say, and the state's access to numerous other sources other than Psaki, gives them everything they need. Leave her out of it. Furthermore, they write, the states have failed to meet their heavy burden for deposing a high-ranking former official under the Apex Doctrine. Do you just get to subpoena any high-ranking officials you want and just depose them? No. Otherwise, they'd be sitting in depositions all day. They have not identified, saying the states have not identified what unique firsthand knowledge that Psaki has when she was just press secretary, what she reported to the public about information she learned from others. So in other words, Psaki's just like this person in the middle of the game of telephone. Somebody tells her something, she hears it, she sends it back out to the press. That's it. If you really want information about what she knows, go talk to the person who told her the thing. And they should have exhausted all of those other reasonable sources until they make Psaki come in here. So the court, accordingly, writes Psaki, should reject any effort to force Ms. Psaki to litigate this motion in the issuing court of Louisiana, right? They don't want her going to Louisiana either. There are no exceptional circumstances justifying the transfer. They say this is the only court considering Psaki's arguments about the burden of a deposition on her as a non-party, and the issues raised in this matter are severable. Therefore, the subpoena should be quashed. Okay, that's their intro. Now let's go through some of the arguments. They said that the subpoena is going to cause an undue burden on Psaki. She's very busy. She's got a lot of tweets to write. She's got a lot of MSNBC stings to hit out there. She can't possibly have time for this useless inquiry that only has to do with government collusion to censor stories all across America. What a waste of time. The burdens of complying with this subpoena are substantial, given that Psaki is not a party to this litigation and has no stake in its outcome, writes Psaki's lawyers. To comply with the subpoena, Psaki, they write, must spend numerous days away from her family and work, preparing for the deposition with not just private counsel, but also with government lawyers, and more time attending it. A lot of work. As made clear in the submission by the government, they say, Ms. Psaki must exercise extraordinary care in providing for and providing testimony that respects the bounds of executive privilege that arise from her prior position as press secretary. That is an undue burden and a disruption in the life of a working parent with a full-time job at MSNBC who did not bring the underlying lawsuit and did not seek to be a part of it. Footnote 1. Yeah, she was the press secretary. She was regurgitating all of that garbage. And if she had any involvement in talking with the big tech people or crafting the message for the big tech people, she's pretty much involved. Now, they have a footnote for us, which is very interesting. They said that she doesn't want to be a part of it. Footnote 1. Footnote 1 says, it appears that the proposed deposition that the states intend to record by video, yes, will also significantly intrude on Ms. Psaki's privacy interests. Oh, great. They say that the government has sought a protective order in Louisiana that would prevent the states from publicly disseminating these records, including those of Ms. Psaki. We'll see. It says that states have urged the court to deny a motion for a protective order completely because of the overwhelming interest in public access and public disclosure. Yeah, we want to see it. There is overwhelming interest in this case. They say that the government's effort to file publicly audiovisual recordings of Psaki and their failure to suggest a compromised protective order is completely unwarranted, and it further increases the burdens of compliance for Ms. Psaki. So she definitely doesn't want to talk, and she definitely doesn't want to be recorded. Don't want any of those things to happen. So they're like, well, yeah, the public interest is true, but she's going to probably say a bunch of bad stuff. We really don't want her to be all over Twitter in the form of memes. They continue. Psaki's lawyers write, they say the states dismiss these burdens that will be imposed on Psaki. By the way, she's a non-party. They say as, quote, just a burden, arguing that she has not made specific factual showing of any undue burden. But whether the burden, Psaki's lawyers say, but whether the burden of complying with a subpoena is undue, what is undue? What is a burden? What is an undue burden? What's like a normal burden? What's a due burden? You're due this burden. No, I think it's undue. Oh, okay. Well, we have to talk about it. What does it mean? Here they write, they say it's relative, and it requires the court to weigh a subpoena's benefits and the burdens and consider whether the information is necessary or whether it's available from another source. Pros and cons and sort of sourcing, direct or somebody else. Like if Psaki has the information, but so do 10 other people, well, then do you really need to talk to Psaki? You might have a good reason for it. But they're saying these are the tests. In this case, Psaki's lawyers say, the burdens that the states seek to impose on Psaki are entirely unwarranted when considered in light of her non-party status, which is ridiculous. I mean, she was a party. The lack of need for her testimony, also would debate that, and the availability of the information that the states seek by other means. Psaki, again, was the press secretary. She was directly responsible for interfacing with the press, and that means that she's directly involved in crafting narratives. In other words, they say, the burden here is not outweighed by a countervailing need for Psaki's testimony. So they balance it out. Too harmful, too difficult for Psaki, not enough benefit. They say the state's alleged need for deposing Psaki is to identify federal officials who are in contact with the social media companies and the contacts of their communications. Right? So the argument is that Psaki's sort of the middle of the wheel, right? We have a hub and spoke model, and Psaki's at the middle. So she's communicating with all of these other social media people and media, liaisons. And the states say, we want to know exactly where she was. She was at the center of this whole saga. And they say that was so that they could identify who was responsible for, quote, censoring Americans online and what method they used. They said a fully effective preliminary injunction, this is from the states, will not only enjoin the government in general terms from trampling on free speech rights on social media, but it's also going to enjoin specific actors most directly engaged in that unlawful conduct. But they say the record's clear. To the extent that the states are entitled to this information, they can get it from other people. They don't need to get it from Psaki. They say, here's why. They say the states do not deny they've already amassed a ton of information about communications between the feds and social media companies that can help. They've already produced over 15,000 of pages, says the government. We've already given the states 15,000 pages of material, which include the identities of officials communicating with social media companies as well. They say that the states served third-party subpoenas. They went to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn. The states filed subpoenas to go get information, seeking the identities of which is just incredible, by the way. So absolute shout out to Eric Schmidt and Missouri and all of the AGs who are behind this. I mean, they're doing amazing work. They're already subpoenaing all of the big tech companies seeking their identities. about misinformation and the nature of those communications. And the states identified dozens of federal officials in contact with these companies. And now the states are in the process of deposing several current officials who can provide direct information of the sort that the states want. In light of this extensive information, Psaki's lawyers say plaintiffs, the states, have not shown why they need Psaki. If they got all that other information, why do they need her? Secondly, they write plaintiffs merely speculate based on her press briefings, which we watched a lot here, that Ms. Psaki can identify other federal officials and provide additional information about their communications, right? She's at the center. Does she really know all these people? They're just presuming she does, but does she? They say that the government responded and they gave Psaki's answers. And she already identified which people she was referring to in her statements, in her interrogatories, which is just sort of like a list of questions that you answer. As the states notes, the press secretary qualified her responses by stating her office could, quote, only speak to its understanding of Psaki's own statements. They said that there is not a basis to assume that there is more to learn or that Psaki herself can provide more. Right. So they're saying, Psaki was responding in the interrogatories, but they were like very, very amorphous. It's probably something like, well, I don't have a clear recollection of this, but based on my memory and the way that these events appear to me at this date, it seems that this was how I saw it. But I also know that there could be more that I could learn, and there may be more that I remember in the future. Okay, so basically everything she said in that middle statement has no meaning at all. Okay. They continue. They say there is no serious dispute that Psaki does not have firsthand information about these communications. By virtue of her role as press secretary, Psaki only received information to report to the public from other sources in the government. And the states and the government knows that she did not herself communicate with social media companies. Not only does Psaki's lack of firsthand information lessen the value of her testimony, but it also means that the government are able to base their responses that inform Psaki's talking points in the first place. And the states have had the opportunity to depose all of those other people. That's why they don't need Psaki. They say there's limited utility in deposing her. A secondhand source who is over 6 months removed from her time in government. She's been out of here for 6 months, by the way. And any speculative benefit of her testimony is outweighed by the burden of her having to prepare. They say nobody's talked about her and sort of equal high-ranking former officials. They say the states have chosen not to pursue and learn about the who, what, and how of different communications. And fourth, they write, the court should reject the state's attempt to blame the government for the burdens that the states are trying to impose by the subpoena. They say the states argue that it takes substantial effort to prepare a deposition. Okay, so let's fast forward through this. There's a lot here. This is all Psaki's argument. Let's fast forward to get to the judge. Let's sort of wrap this up and let's get to the judge's position on this. There'll be a conclusion here. There's a lot to this. Okay, so I guess a big point of this is look how big this document is. 19 pages. They say because there are no exceptional circumstances that warrant transferring this motion from Louisiana, and anything that you do would only exacerbate the burdens of Ms. Psaki, requiring her to litigate this. For the foregoing reasons, the subpoena should be quashed. Signed off on behalf of Jennifer R. Psaki. Many different lawyers all signing on to this. Okay, government lawyers and Psaki's private counsel. Okay, so that is the final word. That's Psaki's final argument. Now, this went over to the judge, and the judge issued a ruling. 7-page filing from the Western District of Louisiana. This involves Jen Psaki, former press secretary to the White House. She did not want to testify or be deposed in the case against the Biden administration for colluding with Big Tech brought by the state of Missouri. And so she filed a motion to quash, which we just read through. It was transferred on November 18th by Judge Ivan from Virginia. And now it's before this court. And the judge says the following. Attached to the notice is your motion to quash, and I'm now looking at it. We've got the following documents here. The motion to quash a subpoena, The United States, their response, they're supporting the motion to quash. So Jen says cancel it. They say United States cancel it. The respondents respond. So the states, we've also got the third party reply and so on. Now the judge, having considered all of these motions, says at the very beginning, for the reasons set forth herein, the motion to quash is denied. And the alternative request to stay the deposition of Jen Psaki is also denied. Now, the judge gave us the good stuff right at the beginning, but we have to see why. The judge writes, on May 5th, 2022, plaintiffs, means the states, Louisiana, Missouri, and those amazing people, they sued the Biden administration, which alleged that the Biden administration colluded and coerced social media companies to suppress information, to censor people. They called it disinfo, misinfo, malinfo. On June 14th, the states sued for a preliminary injunction to stop them from doing that. In July, the court granted the states an expedited injunction and discovery schedule. They said on that date that they wanted to make 10 depositions. The court authorized the states to make 8 of them. One of those depositions was Psaki. Psaki, along with other federal defendants, filed a motion to quash, which we just read. After an expedited hearing and a brief, we are now here. On the evening of November 18th, the federal defendants transferred the motion to my court. The judge writes, this judge is a little bit irritated. You can see that here. He says, law and analysis, subsection A, prior ruling. I already ruled on this. But let's look at this issue again. The judge says, The judge writes, this court previously authorized the states to take Psaki's deposition. Footnote 9. Look at the docket number, entry number 90, when I authorized it. Says much of Psaki and federal defendants' argument is moving the court to reconsider its previous ruling that found already, quote, extraordinary circumstances exist to allow the states to take Psaki's deposition. I already decided this. However, says the judge, no motion to reconsider was filed with this court. You guys didn't come and ask me about it. In making these arguments to another court, federal defendants and Psaki were making an end run around this court's prior ruling. Ooh, this judge is pissed. Ooh, he's pissed. He is not happy about that. Not at all. In making these arguments to another court, federal defendants and Psaki were making an end run around this court's prior ruling. So dad told you no, and you went over to mom, and you said, Mom, can I have this, please? And guess what? Dad found out. He's not happy about this. To the extent that Psaki and defendants from the federal government ask this court to reconsider a prior ruling, you want us to change my mind? That request is denied, okay? Look at that. Right there. Denied. Compelling the testimony of high-ranking government officials is justified only in extraordinary circumstances, quoting a case from 1977. This rule also applies to former high-ranking officials like you, Jen, 2013. They continue, the judge writes, as a preliminary requirement for the exceptional circumstances analysis, the proponent of the deposition, in this case meaning the states, must show that the official has firsthand knowledge related to the claims being litigated that is unobtainable from other sources. Okay, high-ranking person, can you get it from somebody else? Yes, go get it from that somebody else. Do they have firsthand knowledge of this? Yes, then you got to get it from them. If they don't have firsthand knowledge, then you don't need them. Okay, these different layers. After the firsthand knowledge threshold is crossed in determining whether exceptional circumstances exist to warrant a deposition, a court may consider the high-ranking status of the deponent. Jen Psaki, press secretary, pretty high rank in front of the media every day. probably meeting with the president a lot. The potential, a normal president, Biden, don't know. The potential burden that the deposition would impose on them, in this case, right? She's MSNBC contributor now. The substantive reasons for taking the deposition. She was at the center of the press secretary's office. She was the press secretary. This analysis, says the judge, was used in our prior ruling. Despite Psaki's and the defendants, the government's argument that this court considered Psaki as a current defendant, this court considered Psaki as the former White House press secretary and former defendant. Don't tell us how we categorized her, says the judge. And the judge also notes, yeah, this judge is pissed. This judge is not happy. This analysis, so I'm glad I didn't write this brief and send this one into this judge. This judge is not happy. He says this analysis was used in the court's prior ruling. Okay, anytime you see a judge do this multiple times where they write like prior ruling, prior ruling, prior ruling, here's another one, prior ruling. Okay, here's another one in the next sentence. So the judge just finished saying this analysis was used in the court's prior ruling. Next paragraph, short sentence, next paragraph. In the prior ruling, it was noted that the states alleged that during her tenure as White House press secretary, he's saying I already told you this. Nobody likes repeating themselves, especially federal judges. They say during her tenure as press secretary, Psaki made a series of public statements that, one, attested to her personal knowledge of the participation of high-level White House officials pressuring social media platforms. She's on record. And number two, it reinforced the public threats of adverse legal consequences to social media platforms if they did not increase censorship of the views disfavored by the federal officials. Whoa! One more time. The judge said that Psaki made a series of public statements that reinforced the public threats of adverse legal consequences to social media platforms if they didn't increase their censorship. And I was trying to think, what was she saying? What did she say when she said those things? And I sort of remember that, right? Remember when she would come out and she would say, well, we hope Facebook will do it. Well, we hope Twitter will make the right decision on these things. I think that's what the judge is referring to. The states say that they submitted the interrogatories, the question and answer forms, to Psaki's successor, Karine Jean-Pierre, store brand Jen Psaki, that, everybody wishes, I think was Jen Psaki still, but what can you do? Karine is asking for information regarding Psaki's statement. She was asked about those statements. But Karine, her response to the interrogatories was that she had no knowledge of the basis of Psaki's statements because Psaki no longer worked at the White House. So Karine is just referring this over to Psaki. Hey, Karine, can you tell us about these lies that Jen Psaki told? And she, oh, no, I have no idea. Jen who? Oh, no, she doesn't even work here. Oh, no, she left 6 months ago. No, I can't help you with that. Specifically, the judge says, this court found that Psaki's statements made at press conferences on May 5th, 2021, July 15th, 2021, and April 25th, 2022 showed that, I don't even know what those statements are, but showed that Psaki had personal knowledge about censorship of social media, exceptional circumstances were present, and there were substantive reasons for taking her deposition. Despite the fact that Psaki is a former high-ranking official, the potential burden upon Psaki was outweighed by the need to determine whether free speech had been suppressed. Shout out to this judge. Judge says, Psaki is a non-party, but she was formerly a party, and she did make the statements in her employment as a White House press secretary. Therefore, any, quote, solicitude Psaki is entitled to as a third party is outweighed by the strong public interest in preserving First Amendment free speech. Yes! Motion to quash, the judge continues, says, Federal Rule of Civil Procedure allows a court to quash or modify a subpoena. The grounds for quashing Psaki's subpoena are found in Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 45-3A-4, which allows a subpoena to be quashed if the subpoena subjects a person to undue burden. Let's ask ourselves, is it undue or not? In the declaration of Jennifer Psaki in support of her motion, Psaki declared, this is in Psaki's own words, she wrote this down in a form that she sent in saying, I don't want to do this. Psaki said, sitting for a deposition in this matter would be extremely burdensome for me. Among other things, I understand that I would need to devote several days to preparing for the deposition, as well as attending the deposition itself, and that would be highly disruptive to both my work and my family. Federal rules of procedure requires that the attorney responsible for the issuance of a subpoena shall take reasonable steps to avoid imposing an undue burden. Right? The states don't want to burden her. She's busy. It says the states have moved the deposition twice. This is coming from the judge. Okay, I know it's burdensome, but they've moved it for you. And they requested Psaki's presence during normal business hours, close to her residence, and even at work. You don't even have to drive anywhere, Jen. We'll come to you. They say that Psaki must show an undue burden. This is the judge. Psaki must show an undue burden, not simply a burden. Comes from a 2014 case. Having to prepare for the deposition and to give the deposition are examples of burdens, okay? Not undue burdens. They're due. Where the court defines Psaki has an undue burden here, right? The undue burden being she's very busy and she has a lot of work to do. Every person subject to a deposition subpoena would have grounds to quash because everybody's busy and everybody's got work to do. Preparing for and giving a deposition is part of a normal process for every person subpoenaed for a deposition. It's not an undue burden, and accordingly, Psaki and the government motion to quash the subpoena is therefore denied. Alternatively, they say, when they say, oh man, it's denied, so I have to testify. Oh man, that sucks. Okay, well, okay, Judge, if I have to testify, can you just stop? Can you put a stay on the deposition? So like, yes, I'll testify, but not this week or next week. Can you just put a hold on it? Because we're going to be appealing a bunch of this stuff and a lot of onesies and twosies that we've got to work through. And the motion to stay the deposition is the next best thing since I have to be deposed. Can we just postpone it? So the court says, okay, well, let me consider that in subsection C. It says, alternatively, Psaki and the government request that if the original motion is denied, as it just was, the judge is saying, as I just did, that the court stay the deposition pending the appeal. The judge says, well, I think there's a test for that. Let me analyze it according to the test. He says a 4-factor test governs consideration for a motion for stay pending appeal. I got 4 things I need to consider. Number 1, does Psaki have a strong showing that they'll succeed when this does go up on appeal? Will Psaki be irreparably harmed if it's not stayed? Will the stay substantially injure other parties? So like if we grant it for Psaki, are the states going to be harmed? And where does the public interest lie? The first 2 are the most critical. The judge writes, first, the court does not find that Psaki or the federal defendants have made a strong showing that they're going to succeed on the merits. They're not going to win this. As discussed, Psaki's reasons for having to prepare for and give the deposition are not undue burdens. And second, because there is no undue burden, there is no irreparable harm to Psaki. Third, no other parties will be injured. States will be fine. Fourth, the public interest lies in determining whether First Amendment free speech rights have been suppressed. Very important factor. Public has a right to know whether our freedom of speech has been suppressed. I agree. Therefore, Psaki and the federal defendants, their motion to stay the deposition is denied. Conclusion? For the reasons set forth herein, it is hereby ordered that Psaki and the federal defendants' request for an expedited ruling on a motion to quash is granted. We'll rule on this very quickly. You want this done expedited in an expedited fashion? Guess what? The motion to expedite a ruling on this is granted. Happy to do that for you very quickly. Unfortunately, the other 2 rulings are not going to go your way. It is further ordered that Psaki and the defendant's motion to quash is hereby denied. The alternative request to stay the deposition also denied. And it is done in Monroe, Louisiana, by an American hero judge called Terry A. Doherty, United States District Court judge out of the District of Louisiana in the Western Division. Shout out to Jen Psaki sitting for a depo. Oh, it's going to be a lot of fun. And it might even be televised. So or at least video recorded. So maybe Eric Schmidt and the others will release that, and we'll get to see it when it comes out. But that, my friends, is it for us on the day. And thank you for joining along as we covered all of this. We've got Jen Psaki, who we got Biden appeals to the Supreme Court to try to reverse his student loan injunction so that he can get those checks out the door. We talked about a Trump indictment. A lot of attorney generals seem to think it is coming. And of course, the Donald Trump Twitter takeover, which was a lot of fun. Should we play this one more time before we queue up the we should play this one more time, before we queue up the questions. This is what happened over the weekend on Twitter.
Check this out.
All right, my friends. And so let's get those comments and questions and super chats queued up so that we can get into those. But a nice way to end the day, a little free speech action happening over there on the Twitterverse. Donald Trump is back. And of course, we'll get right into some of these super chats. Thank you, everybody, for your extreme generosity and your love and support of the show. Let's see what we had coming in here at the start of the program. The first one is from General Kale, who came in and said, the law matters little anymore. No such thing as a fair trial in a blue district. Start with the difference between Sussman and Danchenko versus Bannon or Jones as examples. Gosh, such a good comment. Yeah, and you're seeing some of this, General Kale. So, think about what we just read through here with Psaki. Okay, Psaki was filing in a different court in Virginia because she literally, the judge said, was trying to do an end run around his order. Right? It's forum shopping. It's exactly what happens, in this country. And unfortunately, the DC circuit happens to have a ton of power. You saw what happened with Sussman, Danchenko, both exonerated, right? Acquitted of all charges, even though they were absolutely as guilty as sin. We've covered it here. Bannon, right, who is objecting to an illegally constituted committee, even Mike Pence agrees now, instead gets convicted in record time. So what are you supposed to do about that? Your point is right. What does the law matter at all anymore? It's like a football game, right? The jurors just see the jerseys that they like on the players, and they pick the jersey they like better. It's disgusting. Thank you, though, for a great question, General. We had Bolgadari is here, says, big trap. The Supreme Court should leave this to the lower courts, will only be used to sow hatred for the court, and that's court packing, yeah. And I think that's on the story about Biden appealing to SCOTUS. So on the student loan saga. So when the student loan saga, when the Supreme Court rejects it, they can turn around and blame the Republicans for not allowing you to get your student loan money. And then they'll say, well, it's those conservative judges. So I guess what we need to do then is pack the court and get a bunch of people on there who do what we want, essentially. So we'll, of course, see that one. Good to see you, Bolgadari. We've got KVLT, Cult of Personality, says, think anything fruitful comes from the AZ Attorney General versus Maricopa? So I saw the letter go out from Mark Brnovich, the Arizona Attorney General, and we may talk about this. What I was thinking of doing is actually sometime this week. It's going to be a light week, so maybe there are two stories that I've been wanting to cover: Arizona, Maricopa County, and then there's a Supreme Court case that challenges a certain something, and several of you have sent that to me and sort of want to cover it. It's at the Supreme Court, and so we'll probably cover that. We may do sort of a short YouTube show and then jump off and just cover the rest of it on Rumble, which is where we can actually have a little bit more free speech. So yeah, I'm not sure about that. I'm not anything fruitful. I mean, in terms of like reversing who wins, like is Carrie Lake going to win or Blake Masters going to win? I'm not so sure of it, but Carrie Lake's a close one. I mean, it really is close. And I think the final Maricopa drop was coming today. But other than that, I'm not sure. We have Curtis Bartle says, can the House stop this madness next year? IRS, DOJ, FBI? Yeah, I mean, so yes, I think that they can put a real big stop to it. So first of all, right, think about all of the J6 stuff that is just off the table now, right? The January 6th Select Committee stuff is just going to be gone. And that, I mean, think about the bandwidth that's going to free up in terms of political prosecutions. I mean, it's really going to free up a ton. So I think that's going to help. I think that when you get the Republican, whatever their committees are called or whatever they look like, going after the DOJ, going after the FBI, they're going to have to respond, and they're going to be under a much closer scrutiny now. So you would imagine that things would change a bit. But I also saw, and I haven't verified this, I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard that Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, was holding an all-hands FBI meeting with like 35,000 people. Let me see if there's anything about this. I saw something about that. Somebody was floating that on Twitter. I don't see any news stories about it, so I could be totally off on that. But, the point is, yeah, they're coming under a lot of scrutiny. And the balance of power, if it changes, that's, typically how you would get reform. You get a bunch of Republicans going after the FBI and the DOJ. Whether they have the stones to carry that through to anything meaningful or not is another story, right? I'm not sure that oftentimes I think they just sell us a bill of goods during the elections and then do whatever they want once they actually take power. We'll see. We had one final one come in from Patrick Vanderlind. Says, love you and love your show. Well, Patrick, I love you back. And thank you for sending that in. Very nice of you. I'm glad that you're here. Patrick Vanderlind. Lindy or Lind? Lindy or Lind? Either way, it's beautiful. And I'm grateful for you. I'm glad that you're here. Yeah, we got a lot to talk about. And I appreciate your support on that. But all right, my friends, I think that is about it for the day. We are going to jump back over to locals. We've got a locals after party. Crown Royal on Rumble says, stop beating your keyboard, Rob. It's a mechanical keyboard. And I'm typing this into Rumble. I like the sensation. There you go. That's over there on our friends in Rumble. Shout out to Eric Scorpio. Shout out to Crown Royal. Shout out to Obook. We've got member of the public over there along with T-Tones. And we've got a whole chat over there on Rumble. So thank you to our Rumble friends. And of course, shout outs to our YouTube friends. We've got Curtis Bartles in the house. What's up, Zulu? We have Hope Knight. Jay Priest is here. Euro Roy Wars, Search and Destroy. Son of Liberty. Love that one. Shout out to Maggie Adams and others. But that, my friends, is about it for us. We are going to wrap it up right there. We're going to jump back over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com for the remainder of our chat. Of course, this is the web address. If you want to come and join us, we'll be right over there for another. We got some comments over there, and we'll get through those. But I also, before we get out of here, want to say thank you to our sponsors of the program. Of course, our law firm. Shout out to our R&R Law Group. My friends, if you happen to know anybody in the state of Arizona who is charged with a crime, that's what we do every day. We help good people charged with crimes find safety, clarity, and hope, not only in their cases, but beyond that, in their lives. We're very passionate about the work that we do. We just absolutely love it. We had our Thanksgiving holiday party today, went into the office, and it was delicious. It was a potluck. Everybody brought delicious food. I, of course, what did I bought something. I don't know what it was. Pies or something. I don't know. Didn't cook anything, but everybody else cooked, and it was delicious. It's the right, it's the right thing to do. You don't want me cooking. But Doritos. Yeah, maybe I brought Doritos. I don't know. Anyways, it was a lot of fun. We have an awesome team, really, really good people who love to help people. So I appreciate you keeping your antennas open, okay? Anytime anybody needs help with a criminal charge in the state of Arizona, that is what we do. That's all we do. So some of the more serious felony offenses, a lot of drug charges, some domestic charges. We have some of the more gruesome stuff, we handle all of it. But oftentimes people will get some of the simpler stuff too. Disorderly conduct, criminal damage, urinating in public, that type of stuff. We can help with any of it, all of it. And we're passionate about it. So 480-787-0394, online at rrlawaz.com. So somebody's asking, how do I contact your firm with personal legal questions? So you can call, schedule a free appointment, 480-787-0394, or go online, rrlawaz.com. You can schedule an appointment right online, click schedule here, or you can send an email to info@rrlawaz.com. Zulu is here. Zulu says, I always end up a little bit chafed after the Psaki shows. Yeah, things can get a little bit aggressive when we're talking about these types of lawsuits. Things get very heated, and sometimes the news about what's happening is hard. It's hard to interpret. It's hard to accept. So there's a lot in there. I can understand how Zulu might be a little bit winded after a segment like that. Whew. But it's a lot. All right. So my friends, thank you to R&R Law Group. That's of course us. Thank you also to 4patriots.com for sponsoring this tremendous program. We have, check out 4patriots.com, use promo code Robert, get 10% off everything in the store. You'll love it. It's great. We also have Goldco, and nobody wants to be, without gold. Everybody wants gold. So go to robertlikesgold.com and check it out. But that is it for us, my friends. Thank you to all the mods in the house who mod down the fort, keep things nice and orderly. I think Vienti Kiss is at game night on Monday. Oh, great. So he'll be back here tomorrow. But shout outs to K Bean, who's in the chat, along with Just Cause. We've got Lean, we've got Playin' Hooky, Ronnie Cole, along with Zulu and Geo swung by, and we've got Henry who comes by from time to time. And they are all modding down the fort for us. We love the mods who keep things nice and orderly. But otherwise, my friends, we are done here for the day. We'll have our regular morning walk and talks for locals members and YouTube members tomorrow morning. But otherwise, we're going right over to our after party at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. But we will be back tomorrow, if you're not joining us, right here at the same time to do it all again. And I hope to see you here so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. Have a tremendous evening, my friends. I'll see you right back here tomorrow.